feel loneliness and joy and love. There's nothing more, but I want nothing more. Christopher Hitchens wrote in one sense his own memento mori and thought clearly about his death many months before it came. He talked candidly about cancer, making him sober and objective. This week, it finally killed him. Tonight, we look at the legacy of an extraordinary writer, polemicist and thinker. We'll see one of the last TV interviews with Christopher Hitchens in a moment. First, here's Stephen Smith.
Dashing, smart and funny. To his admirers, the young Christopher Hitchens was the scourge of idle thinking and mendacious world leaders. A bit like Hemingway, he was a two-fisted writer that went for typing, scrapping, oh yes, and drinking and smoking too. Of a leftish bent, he nevertheless challenged sacred cows like the mythology surrounding President Kennedy.
Well, like everyone else of my generation, I can remember exactly where I was standing on the fateful day when John Fitzgerald Kennedy nearly killed me, because I can remember the Cuba crisis.
Ah, Mr.
Hi, Mr. Fowler, welcome.
Some said Tom Wolfe had Hitchens in mind when he created the hard-drinking hack played by Bruce Willis in the movie of Bonfire of the Vanities.
We went for a long lunch. We had a number of scotches before lunch, big tumblers of scotch. He wine at lunch and then cognac after, and we sort of stumbled back up to the office and sat him down at an old rickety desk with an Olivetti typewriter, and he produced 1,000 seamless words in under half an hour. He wrote better drunk than any man I know who could do it sober.
In fact, Hitchens, the hitch to his intimates, had the work ethic of his hero George Orwell, if not the same addiction to tea. Settled in the States, an American citizen, Hitchens' reaction to 9/11 led him to modify his view of George Bush and end up backing the Iraq War.
People said ignorant, unqualified, uncultured, uninstructed. If his brains were made of gunpowder and they detonated, they'd barely be enough to disarrange his hair. Yet here he is, halfway through his first term, with wall-to-wall public sympathy. So, were his critics premature, or has he been doing something right?
Though he found common cause with Tony Blair over Iraq, the atheist Hitchens, by now ill with cancer, couldn't agree with him over religion.
Once you assume a creator and a plan, it makes us objects in a cruel experiment whereby we are created sick and commanded to be well. I'll repeat that. Created sick and then ordered to be well. And over us to supervise this is installed a celestial dictatorship, a kind of divine North Korea.
He was determined not to yield an inch to the argument that religion might have some purpose or some justification to it.
Unlike Orwell, who wrote a famous essay called Books versus Cigarettes, Hitchens chose both. In other respects, though, he may be judged to be in the same tradition as the master.
Stephen Smith. Well, last November, Jeremy interviewed Christopher Hitchens for this programme. He started by asking him about cancer.
Are you terrified by it?
No, I think it's a superstition, one among many. And I think I know where it comes from, actually, if you'd like me to say. I mean, well, when I was a child, we were all very frightened still by polio. It takes an effort to remember that now, but in many countries people still are. Previous generations would have been smallpox, the heart that never gets the right rhythm, bronchitis, TB, all these things. But none of them have the same, I think, horror as cancers have been allowed to acquire. And I think it's probably because of the idea of there being a live thing inside you, a sort of malignant alien that can't outlive you, but that does, in a sense, have a purpose to its life, which is to kill you and then die. It's like an obscene parody of the idea of being pregnant. In fact, I always feel sorrier for women who have cancer than men. For men, the idea of hosting another life of any kind is sort of hard to think about. But for a woman, it must be a grotesque, nasty version of the idea of being a host to another life. I have a feeling this is why people propitiate it with bogus cures, terrible rumours, scare stories and so on. And I've set my face to trying to demonstrate that it's a malady like any other, and it will yield to reason and science, and that's what I'm trying to spend my time vindicating.
Reason and science, but
Yes.
yet the word most commonly used about cancer is battling cancer, isn't it?
Yes, and I again think that's a version of the pathetic fallacy. It's giving a real existence to something that's in a sense inanimate, real sense inanimate. It has a sort of life, but not a real. I rather think it's battling me, I have to say. It's much more what it feels like. I mean, I have to sit passively every few weeks and have a huge dose of kill or cure venom put straight into my veins, and then follow that up with other poisons too. Doesn't feel like fighting at all. Possibly resisting, I suppose, but no. You feel as if you're drowning in passivity and being assaulted by something that has a horrible persistence that's working on you while you're asleep.
And there will be people, and they won't say it to your face perhaps, but well, he smoked a lot, he drank a lot.
Yes, well, that's exactly what's demystifying about it. I mean, there are also people who say, it's God's curse on me that I should have it near my throat because that was the organ of blasphemy which I used for so many years. And I thought, well, I've used many other organs to blaspheme as well if it comes to that. No, it is banal in that precise way. It's, if you've led a rather bohemian and rackety life as I have, it's precisely the cancer you'd expect to get. That's a bit of a yawn.
Do you still consider yourself a leftist?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, I do.
Because as you know, many of your critics would say what's happened to you is that, you know, as your waistband expanded, your politics moved further to the right.
Well, they should see my waistband now. I've just lost 30 pounds.
Not
Not in the
want...
nicest possible way.
But the accusation
No,
against
of course.
you is...
Well, it's such a well-known script that it is indeed deserving of the name cliché, and I pin that accusation on my accusers. That's what they're resorting to.
So do any of these labels apply to you, leftist or whatever? I mean, you're more of an iconoclast, aren't you?
Well, there isn't a global international working class movement anymore. There used to be. Some of us miss it like a missing limb, but it's gone. Is it likely to be replaced? I don't think so. Is there a socialist theory of an alternative world economy that, just in theory, could stand up against the idea of a market system, however defined? Not conspicuously, no. In fact, the anti-globalizing movement seems to me to be nostalgic for a pre-industrial society in many ways, thus to be rather conservative. From this, you could probably tell that I still think like a Marxist, which I do.
Yes. You believe in the dialectic?
Yes, and in the materialist conception of history. Yeah, I do that.
Do you think it's been a life well lived?
I'd really have to leave that to others, Jeremy. I have to. I'm encouraged, I'll say this much, I've been encouraged in the last few months by some extraordinarily generous letters, including, these are the ones I take most to heart, from people I've never met or don't know. If they say that what I've written or done or said means anything to them, then I'm happy to take it at face value for once. I'll take that. And yes, it cheers me up. And I hope it isn't written with the intention of doing so, though I must allow for it possibly being for that reason. But in case you are watching this, anybody, and you ever wonder whether to write to anyone, always do, because you'd be surprised by how much difference it can make. Here's a regret, I regret not doing it more often myself.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Christopher Hitchens talking to Jeremy last year. There's another chance to see the full half hour of Jeremy's interview with Christopher Hitchens on BBC Two on Sunday at 11:30 p.m. Well, joining me now, a close friend of Christopher Hitchens, the historian Simon Sharma. Really nice of you to come in, Simon, on a day that I'm sure is very difficult for you.
How could I not, Emily?
I mean, he's a man who clearly was not scared of making enemies, not scared of upsetting people, and yet there has been this tangible sense of affection for a man who embraced division.
You know, I think it's partly because Christopher was really against a time of pablum and demureness, really. He believed himself to be sort of the inheritor of mischief makers like Tom Paine and John Wilkes, the Levellers in the English Civil War, and above all, George Orwell. Orwell said memorably in his essay on English and political writing, the English language and politics, that most political writing is in defense of the indefensible and takes on a kind of transparently meretricious quality. Christopher was not like that, really. He wanted really to be not a party person of any kind, but his own particular self, wielding his own particular sword. The bitter irony, in a way, but for those of us who knew and were deeply fond of him, was that his notorious larger-than-life habits were completely of a piece with his intellectual courage. That's to say, there was something morally decent about his double scotch, if you catch my drift. That he was sort of outside the kind of normal boundaries of the polite, the conventional, and the ingratiating.
And when you talk about
we miss
being...
that in our age, I think.
And this idea of being a mischief maker, I mean, was it ever polemicist for the sake of argument, or do you think he genuinely believed every time he went against the grain?
Well, I think I feel complete sort of fraud in a way, actually, sitting in his shoes, which are really in lots of ways impossible to fill. But being anguished at taking his name in vain, nonetheless, I think he would have said there was a certain amount of instinctive taste for mischief, that if there was trouble brewing, he would seek it out. That's why he wasn't a conventional journalist. He wasn't prepared to be a kind of an armchair journalist. He wanted to go where the sewer stunk most awfully, and he made sure he was there. So he kind of liked, actually, skiing along the razor blade in that kind of way, to mix my metaphors, in a way shocking even to Newsnight and to Hitch. So he would want to do that, but I will say the vast majority of the arguments, otherwise why, for God's sake, support the war in Iraq and alienate most of your ideological comrades? Most of the kind of arguments he took them absolutely from principle.
Simon, let me ask you, today we heard this quite curious push from David Cameron about revival of Christian values, and there's something ironic in a way of this coming on the day when such a passionate believer in atheism has died. Did it alter his approach, do you think, to death?
Oh, I'm sorry,
well,
Emily.
In the sense
of rising odour of sanctity? Is that what you mean?
This, that God is not great, and this very strong determination not to be pushed
I think
into
again,
that belief.
shades of Hitch, forgive me. I don't think he was like Richard Dawkins in the sense in which he felt there needed to be a sort of impassioned neo-Darwinian crusade. I think he was surprised, bemused and shocked. All our generation were, really, I'm slightly older than him, that theocracy was possible in the 21st century. Not that religion was still hanging around, but religion which actually had the power of force to it. The great moment for many of us was the fatwa for Salman Rushdie. It changed Hitch, it changed a lot of us. Until that point, we could make jokes, actually, about making sin a crime, a capital crime, too. After that, Salman's fatwa kind of wiped the smile from our faces. So in that sense, actually, he was prepared to kind of do battle with the possibility that the state might still have the power of zealotry that could actually get you in horrible trouble. I mean, during his illness, I'll say this, I was put in mind of a great unrepentantly atheistic death. I know even though Hume was somewhat of a Tory, Christopher would not mind being identified. Hume died a heroic death, reported famously by Adam Smith, his friend, who was visited by a doctor who said, well, I'm delighted, Mr. Hume, to be able to report to our mutual friend that I leave you in better spirits than I'd imagined. And Hume said, no, my good doctor, I can't believe, but you would not choose the truth. So tell my enemies I am dying as fast as I can, and my friends as easily and cheerfully as I can. The courage with which Hitch looked at his own death was the sense that in truth is the ultimate strength, and you can aim for no better thing than that.
Simon Sharma, thank you very much. Thank you.